All right, good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. This is June 11, 2024, Bridgewater Township Zoning Board of Adjustment. It's a regular meeting. Both adequate and electronic notice of this meeting specifying the time, place, and manner in which such notice was provided in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act, NJSA 10:4-6. Specifically, on January 9, 2024, proper notice was sent to the Courier News and the Star Ledger and filed with the clerk of the Township of Bridgewater and posted on the Municipal Bulletin Board. Please be aware of the Zoning Board of Adjustment policy for public hearings. No new applications will be heard after 9:30, and no new testimony will be taken after 10 p.m. If you're able, please rise for the salute to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hi there, Catherine. You're going to help us out tonight with calling some roll for us?
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman Foose.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Whiteley.
Here.
Ms. Emin. Mr. Sweeney.
Here.
Mr. Fresco.
Here.
Mr. Bongiorno.
Here.
Mr. Gayeski.
Here.
Mr. Sikat.
Here.
Mr. Kulak.
Here.
Mr. Vessia was absent. Mr. Gabbett.
Here.
We have a quorum. And Mr. Aller.
Here.
Mr. Burr.
Here.
And Ms. Saramad, myself, is here.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to open the meeting to members of the public that would like to speak on any land use issue that is not on our agenda tonight. Seeing none, I'm going to close that portion. Board minutes, we have none for approval, but for resolutions, I saw that Nancy put one resolution on Section 9, and I'd like to just get it done with, if the board is amenable to that. I have Resolution 2401, and it's an amendment to our bylaws. And Rich, you want to just take us through legally what it's going to allow our land use office to do?
Sure, this would amend the rules and regulations for this board that would require any applicant seeking use variance approval for anything other than one single-family home to provide the board with a certified transcript and to provide it within a reasonable time after the conclusion of each hearing date.
And this will save work for Township of Bridgewater, save us money, and make things easier for our land use office. So if anyone has any changes or comments, I would entertain a motion, please.
I move.
Mr. Widely, a motion. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
Mr. Bongiorno. And if we get a roll call vote?
Mr. Foose.
Yes.
Mr. Whiteley.
Here. Yes.
Ms. Emin. Mr. Sweeney.
Yes.
Mr. Fresco.
Yes.
Mr. Bongiorno.
Yes.
Mr. Gayeski.
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, moving on. We have two applications scheduled for tonight. The first up is Chimney Rock Self-Storage. We also have scheduled Belly Holdings, LLC. Good evening, everyone. So I'd like to just kind of get Mr. Melnick's game plan for tonight, and you guys can make a decision because we want to accommodate everyone here in a timely manner. But we also have an objector to this case. That was Ms. Westlake. So maybe, Mr. Melnick, real quick, you can take us through your plan for tonight, and then Ms. Westlake, you could do the same.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, members of the board. As the board will remember, we were last here a couple of months ago, and at the conclusion of that hearing, we were just about done with the testimony of the applicant's planner, Mr. Ricky, seated to my right, and we stopped there to return tonight to listen to comments and questions really from the board and members of the public, including the objector. What I'd like to do tonight is, because 2 months have passed, I'd like Mr. Ricky to just give a quick conclusion or summation of what his testimony was last time for the board and public's benefit, and then we'll open it up to the objector and public for cross-examination of Mr. Ricky, and then turn it over to the objector for their case.
Perfect, thank you. Hi there. Why don't you come on down, we'll get it on the record on the microphone. Thank you.
After the last hearing, we sort of looked at what had been presented thus far, and I think at this point, honestly, I think we'd really just like to make a public comment.
Okay.
So we would be quite brief, maybe at most 5 minutes. And honestly, unless Mr. Ricky has loads and loads of new things to say, I don't think I need to worry about cross-examining him either, so.
All right, great, thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
All right, Belly Holdings, you don't have to let us know. It's just we wanted you to have full information before you made any decision to stay or leave. And you know, I always get pushed by this guy to move things along, so we try and keep it moving. All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Melnick, it's all yours.
Excuse me, Mr.
And-
Chairman.
Yes,
And in
please.
that spirit, I will,
Hold on one second. Before we get into testimony, I've got something I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on. I think it's something that's worthwhile for the board to hear and for the board to hear the applicant's reaction to, so if I may.
Please. Yeah.
This is an article that was in the New York Times dated April 26, 2024. The headline reads, "Americans went all in on self-storage. That demand is suddenly cooling." Now, I'm not going to read all of this, but I will read a couple of sentences from it because I think they're particularly pertinent. Self-storage, an industry that was booming a few years ago during the coronavirus pandemic, now finds it has built way too many rental units, prompting some developers to walk away from projects entirely. Last year, 245 self-storage construction projects were abandoned, more than double the number from the year before. The sector faces what Michael Elliott, an equity analyst, characterized as significant headwinds after years of growth. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'd just like to hear the applicant's reaction to this.
well, first off, I'll give you what the applicant's position is with respect to the marking conditions. I'll also ask Mr. Aller to advise the board on whether that article can be considered or the information that you just read into the record can be considered. But, you know, the applicant, like all applicants, are not interested in spending money on me, on Mr. Ricky, or anybody else for a project that they don't think is going to be successful. They make those decisions before coming here, and as we continue on in the process, decide whether to continue prosecuting the application. Here, as was testified by Mr. Lang at the first hearing, there is sufficient analysis that was done to corroborate a successful project if this were approved, and they're ready to go forward and build it.
This analysis that you just referenced, when was it done?
We can go back into the transcripts or call Mr. Lang if that's pertinent to the board. But again, I would ask Mr. Aller to weigh in on this article.
At this point. So, you know, Mr. Sweeney, that article is not really to be considered evidentiary to the board. It can't be accepted by the board for the truth of whatever it purports to say. It's not evidence that there is or isn't a demand for self-storage units. We've heard sworn testimony that there is such a demand and that there's more demand than supply in this area. You know, all the news that's good to print is maybe talking about California, right? I mean, I don't know what that's all about, which is why it's not something that the board should really consider.
Mr. Aller, if Mr. Sweeney wanted to use his deliberation to read more of this article, would that be allowable?
Well, you know, I think if you wanted to bring up points that you think might be pertinent to the case, as opposed to reading the article, I mean, you can certainly do that. You know, if you think that there's some issue that the board should discuss because you think that is something that should be discussed, then you can certainly do that. But I don't suggest reading the article into the record. But, you know, if it piqued something in your mind that you want the applicant to address, I think you can do that by questioning either the planner or, you know, we have most of the witnesses here, and they can certainly address that. If you felt like you needed to have them go back and advise again on the demand for self-storage units in this area, on the East Coast even, you know, they probably are prepared to do that as well.
Okay, I'm fine leaving it as is. I just thought it was interesting.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Sir?
Thank you. Mr. Ricky, again, seated to my right, you understand you remain under oath?
I do.
Okay, and you were here and testified on behalf of the applicant, and you were qualified as a professional planner on this case?
That's correct.
Would you please give the board and the public just a brief summation of what your testimony was last time and conclusions with respect to the variances being sought here?
Sure, and I'm going to do my best to be brief here. I provided pretty detailed testimony last time.
Mr. Ricky, I wanted to put on the record, because I did go back and watch the last hearing. I wanted to apologize to you, because I was trying to get you in under the 10 o'clock window. It certainly, I didn't want to deminimize anything you were saying, because you've been in front of this board many, many times, and I personally put great stock in what you say, and I wanted to thank you, and I'm sorry for rushing you at the last meeting.
Not at all, and Understood.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that said, I mean, I provided testimony already, so I am going to try to be brief and really try to hit the main points. But there are a number of variances involved, so the testimony did go into each one of those variances. So some of the bulk variances I may not spend as much time in the summary. But again, just moving, where do you start? The beginning. We're in the C5 zone here in Bridgewater Township. Again, what's interesting, it's only 4 lots, right? This is the only C5 zone in town, and it's the subject property, 2 single-family residential properties that are about 1 acre each, undersized lots, and the adjacent assisted living facility. It's the only C5 zone in town. Permitted uses in the zone include nursing homes, continuing care retirement facilities, congregate care facilities, assisted living facilities, and senior housing. So mostly uses geared towards the elderly, general offices and medical dental offices, and conditionally, the zone permits service stations. So it's relatively limited in the number of uses. I provided testimony that this area of Route 22 sees approximately 60,000 vehicles per day, as reported by NJDOT, and that the applicant has a building that's been ranging from 50 to 80% vacant today. I provided some demographics. I think there was a little bit of an objection to this at one point of an office snapshot from Lee Associates that indicated the Somerset County area had a 16.1% vacancy rate in 2023, the first quarter, and JLL reported a 25.8% for Northern New Jersey of 2023 in the first quarter. And it was in my opinion as a planner, a municipal planner as well, that there's less demand for office space in a post-COVID world than in previous years. And part of the rationale is if one of the principal uses, office, is not needed. I talked about previously how at least the assisted living facility next door was not interested in migrating and expanding onto the site. I think one of the important elements of another use potentially for the board to consider is there need for what the applicant's proposing? And this is another issue that's come up tonight with the New York Times article, but the applicant provided it and indeed took its own analysis. And it's my understanding as a planner, when you look at these analyses, it's largely based upon population within a range of area. So unless new facilities are built and the population decreased or was eliminated, that demand is still going to exist in the marketplace. And what the testimony that was provided by the applicant is that there's currently a supply of approximately 723,000 square feet in the 5-mile trade area. A total of 170,000 square feet of additional space is in approval stages, which totals 893,000 square feet. So the population in the trade area is 143,000 approximately, results in demand for over 1 million square feet of self-storage space. The proposed facility would help meet the unmet demand for the trade area we talked about. And some of the other elements that were also provided by Mr. Lang is that some of the existing units, many of them are older properties that are single-story type facilities, lack climate control and other amenities that these modern buildings provide today. So the proposed service is largely not provided in the area today that's being proposed by the applicant, and that it was the applicant's testimony that the facility would capture approximately 15% of the needed demand. So there's appears to be a lot of play based on the applicant's analysis and what is needed in the marketplace today. And also, I thought it was important that this is a type of business model that's not looking to take away from another business that provides self-storage space. There appears to be need for additional space, so there's the ability for existing businesses to exist successfully in addition to a new business. I talked about how, I think I said it several times, the passive nature of this use acts as an excellent transitionary use from a commercial area to a residential area. And you heard a lot from the site engineer and the architect about all the design considerations, keeping the roof down to the same height of the existing building, designing it to look like an office building, with the zone was one of the principal uses intended for the zone, that this is not the days of when self-storage facilities were single-story facilities with a lot of garage space, the orange doors and the like. This is made to look like an office building that we think can harmoniously be integrated into this area. I talked about how the 2010 master plan, which was the master plan that it was a 2010 master plan element and economic element for the Route 22 corridor that specifically looked at Route 22. And I talked about how this application advanced numerous goals of that master plan, enhance increased tax ratables, support existing economic anchors, and I'm abbreviating here, adjust to the contemporary needs of commerce and Bridgewater residents. And that's another reason that we speak to need, because clearly if something's needed in the facility, it makes sense irrespective of other planning analysis and just law reasons. But if something's needed, it makes a lot of sense on a real just first start level. Encourage long-term sustainable site planning, enable more flexibility in development context, and promote economic activity in the appropriate locations, offer building design guidelines where appropriate. We try to be sensitive to all those aspects. I think the floor area ratio was something that was discussed at a great deal. I talked about how floor area ratio is a means to control mass. It's also a means to control the intensity of a site. And in that intensity, the number of people, population, number of cars, and all those interrelated activities. I also talked about how the floor area ratio, I didn't want to call it artificially inflated, but it is inflated as a result of steep slopes on the property that were man-made slopes, and that a good portion of the first floor of the building is underground. So in that regard, while the number is higher, it's not increasing the visibility of mass as viewed from adjoining properties. And I compared at some length the number of parking spaces that would be required for various facilities. And a building of this size would require, by way of example, 467 parking spaces for a medical facility, 346 parking spaces for a general office building, and that the existing footprint would require 124 parking spaces for a medical facility and 92 spaces for a general office, where we're talking between 14 and 16 spaces in terms of need for this use. So that speaks to its passive nature. And I also talked about how the applicant, how they kept the scale of the building lower. You heard this in great detail from the architect, that the building's deck line of 23.63 feet to 25.63 feet, that's between 36 and 38% lower than the 35-foot height requirement, and then the intent was to not change the height as viewed from nearby uphill residential land uses. And this is a very unique site. There's not too many sites that I see that are 1,000 feet wide. Even that, I think there was some concern about the size of the building. This building would still only occupy 33% approximately of the frontage along the roadway. So as you're driving by, I don't believe it's going to feel overly large and out of character. It's a very specific condition of this site. It's well removed from surrounding land uses, 290 feet from the closest point of the adjoining assisted living facility, and approximately 180 feet from the nearest residential building, measured building to building. We talked at great length about the perimeter landscaping that's being amended, and as the applicant has agreed to essentially fill every area that's possible on the site to try to harmonize this use to the greatest extent possible. And there was, I think, significant testimony from the site engineer regarding the impervious coverage, how the track impervious coverage is being reduced from 44% to 40% overall, and there's two standards that the town has. You have a maximum improvement coverage standard to allow 48%, where the applicant, the 8% associated, where 40% is permitted, where 8% of that improvement coverage was associated with the fire road, which is largely going to be a grass type of appearance. So we believe we were substantially consistent with the intent of the zone plan in that regard. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion, since the facility would not be too large or out of scale, it was limited in terms of intensity, that in terms of its parking needs, the population intensity on the site, that it would not result in a substantial departure from the zone plan. Regarding the bulk variances, I discussed and I reiterated some of the testimony from the site engineer, is that despite this lot having a conforming over 3-acre minimum lot area, there is no developable area on this property today based on how the setbacks are required from the local regulations. And I did opine that despite the need for bulk variance release, that the application would still result in sound land use planning, as the existing building would be located slightly further back from Route 22. And I looked at the lot as, in terms of percentages, as a barometer of good site planning and relationships of land use. The applicant was retaining the existing side yard setback to the nursing home, no closer. In the widest portion of the lot, approximately 55% of the lot would comprise front and rear yard setbacks. In the narrowest portion of the lot, I'm talking about the portions where the building is proposed, approximately 54% of the lot will be associated with front and rear yard building setbacks. So despite needing variance relief, those are sound land use proportions for front and rear yards. We also talked about how, in the context, the applicant was looking to keep the building lower, and in that context, it ended up being slightly wider while providing the same amount of square footage, rather than going to the 35-foot height limit per se, keeping the building lower between 24 and 26 feet. And I talked about how the variance is requested for the improvement coverage. We'll still have 52% of the lot as unimproved land. And I mentioned that the impervious coverage, as discussed differently from the improvement coverage, would be reduced to 40%. So it was my opinion that ample open space would be provided. And I did note that the commercial zones in Bridgewater permit lot improvement coverages rating from 40 to 70%. The C5 district at 40% provides the lowest impervious coverage for all zones in the township in this regard. So, and I did mention that where self-storage facilities are permitted, an impervious coverage of 60% is allowed in the M1B district. And for all these reasons, I opine that the application met several purposes of the municipal land use law, because the site is particularly well suited for the use of meets purpose A, since adequate light, air, and open space is being provided, meets purpose C, and also because of the need of this facility, it met purpose G, to provide appropriate locations for commercial uses to meet the needs of New Jersey citizens. Regarding the negative criteria, the variances can be granted without a substantial detriment to the public good, without a substantial impairment to the zone plan, through the enhanced quality of proof. And I went through the Medici criteria, which I'll discuss again briefly. Testimony was provided that this would be extremely low traffic generator with extremely low activity levels, no overnight use. In terms of perimeter landscaping will remain, and the applicant proposed 38 trees, and I think this may change somewhat based on the board planner, 238 evergreen trees, 954 shrubs, 140 grasses, 240 perennials in ground cover. So a significant investment in landscaping. The project was, I think it's clear, is less intense than an office or medical land uses. would create less traffic and parking needs than on the site than a permitted use. Would not have any impacts on community facilities or schools. Would not have any substantial negative lighting impacts. A low generator of noise. And in regards to the slopes, I mean, these are slopes that were already disturbed slopes to date that the applicant is stabilizing and improving stormwater as part of the process. I did talk about how the intent of the zone plan was created in the 2004 master plan, when I believe self-storage facilities were more industrial in nature. Here I think the proposed design appears to be like an office building with sensitivity, both roadway frontages as part of the design, and I showed how to advance several purposes of the Route 22 master plan. So the granting of the variances would not result in a substantial departure from the zone plan. Regarding hillside development, this was discussed in your ordinance section 126-265. I talked about there were a number of standards that the board should consider for approval for hillside development, and the engineer discussed them, and the applicant essentially achieves all the standards when it's appropriate to develop in hillside areas. In terms of the enhanced burden of proof to reconcile the omission of this use from the municipal master plan, I discussed how self-storage facilities are only permitted in the M1B district, and that additional need exists today than when self-storage facilities were designated to be permitted within the M1B district. And I talked about how that was designed in around 2004. I talked about how self-storage facilities have evolved over time. The first phase facilities had, multiple doors. They didn't have climate control. And since then, what's being proposed here is a modern building that emulates an office building with minimal doorway openings, climate-controlled facility. So I think it was my finding that the building is no longer industrial in nature. It mimics an office use. And for this reason, there are changed circumstances since self-storage facilities were proposed to be located only in an industrial district. I think this is evidenced by the proposed site design. That's the best I can do to summarize quickly. Hope that wasn't too long.
For the record,
That would have been twice.
for the record, you could have had all night. All right.
No, I'm just trying to be, on point.
We have no other questions on direct.
All right. Board questions for Mr. Ricky on his planning testimony.
Just one question. Were you planning on putting on any charging stations in the parking lot?
We can have our engineer testify to that, but I believe we have testified to that before.
We have one, we have one?
Just so the transcript picks you up.
Yes, Paul Winters. Paul Winters, Bowman Consulting, the applicant's engineer.
Mr. Winters, I'll just remind you that you're still under oath.
Yes, sir. Yes, we have provision for one EV parking space, which is consistent with the current legislation from the state of New Jersey. So that'll be at the front entrance of the building.
And how many handicap spots?
One handicap space at the front, which is van accessible.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Ricky, you mentioned briefly particular suitability, and that's one of the requirements that you have to meet in terms of showing us or demonstrating to us how this site is particularly well suited for the proposed use. With that in mind, I've gone through the variances. I appreciate you're doing the same. And there's a couple that jump out at me when I'm looking for proof that this site is particularly well suited to this use or is not. And let me just run through a couple of those variances again, all right? Floor area ratio. What you're proposing is more than 3 times greater than what's allowed. Not 3%, not 30%, but 3 times greater than what's allowed. Landscape buffer, conservation easement, you're proposing half of what's required. Lot coverage, we've talked a lot about lot coverage. The bottom line, though, is that what you're proposing is more than 50% greater than what's allowed. And the last thing I'll mention are setbacks along Route 22, Donahue Road, parking. They're about 1/4 of what's required to as much as 1/2 of what's required. So some of these variances, and when I look at them, appear to be extraordinarily large. And I'm having a hard time reconciling that with a demonstration that this site is particularly well-suited to this proposed use. The two seem to be pointing in opposite directions. Help me understand.
I think your question is pretty similar to your question last time as well. I attempted to answer last time as well. And I think to begin, we have a site here that has 0 development potential. Nothing can be built on it today without a variance. If there wasn't a building there today, if someone bought this lot, nothing could be built. Because the way the zoning is written for this piece of property, I think you can maybe build like 1 or 2 square feet or something. There's essentially no building area. With that said, there is an existing building, there's an existing parking lot and the like, and the applicant's really largely not encroaching into those established yards any further. What they're doing is we're lowering the impervious coverage, we're improving the stormwater management, and when I talked about the FAR, that's the number that comes up that you're mentioning is like 3 times. When you don't consider slopes, which aren't impacting mass or intensity, that number comes down to 0.693, and that's also, that 0.693 number is also calculating square footage that's underground that's not creating mass. So I believe that, yes, we are seeking a variance for floor area ratio. I think it's realistically much lower, and I talked about how this site has the ability to still operate at a low intensity level, where this zone plan calls for a moderate intensity level because it needs so little parking. So what we're kind of, I think the board's evaluating somewhat, is that if our impervious coverage numbers being from 44 to 40%, which is, I think we were talking about some semantics, is essentially conforming, and that the improvement coverage of 8% higher, that's almost entirely associated with the fire road that was required of the applicant. That's going to be covered with grass. That's not going to really give the appearance of improvement. Is that because this building has such less needs than other facilities, parking and its intensity, the building ends up being a little bit larger, but within the same amount of impervious surface. While this board doesn't make decisions on financial purposes, this is an economic development area, and there are some economic development benefits of having a larger building in the same area of improvement as well. But for all those reasons, because this is such a passive, low intense use, you have a slightly larger building, but you don't have more impervious surface on this site. So the amount of green space and the like remain consistent with the zone. Kind of coming back to the same issues, but that was trying to summarize largely my argument. I think times have changed. When these facilities were anticipated just in industrial areas. In 2004, I talked about how these facilities, I think we all recall, there was like a manager on the site. There were single-story buildings with garages that you pulled right up to. This is a completely different type of facility. It's climate controlled. It looks like an office building. It's attractive. It mimics an office building, which the zone calls for. So it's going to look nice. It's not going to be an eyesore. It's a very long lot that can accommodate a bigger building because the lot is approaching a quarter-mile lot. 1,360 feet is a quarter mile. We're at 1,000, so we're at point. It's a really wide lot.
Thank you.
Question. So if to build a building on this lot, with all the various setbacks and requirements, if you were to not need variances, what size building could be built there?
It's functionally zero. I think it may be like 1 or 2 or 5 square feet, but it's essentially, there's no buildable envelope.
Thank you.
Mr. Ricky, following up on that question, could you kind of give the board a quick education on what reverse condemnation is and kind of what that planning concept is and how that plays into a zoning board's role in providing relief to variances?
The concept is that every lot has to have some utility associated with it, some use that it can be used for.
Explain that, because that's planner speak. I've heard it before, but we have new members. Really dive into that, because I think that's an important concept.
It's like you own a single-family residential property, right? You have a lot it's an existing lot of record. You have to be able to use that lot for some purpose. This is a commercial lot, so you would anticipate that there could be a commercial land use of some sort on there. Because the lot is irregular in shape, it meets the minimum lot area requirements for the zone. It's not undersized. Because of its irregular shape and the way the zoning was crafted, you can't build anything here. So the applicant has the ability to do nothing with their property by the current zoning. And this, now we're getting into the legal area of it, and it's arguably a taking of someone's property if they can't build upon a conforming size lot.
And you're testifying as a planner, not a lawyer, but it's your interpretation that, can you say that again, please?
The taking of their property that they don't,
All right.
that would be my interpretation.
All right. And following up on that, because I do think what you said is very important, in weighing uses of different intensities, you mentioned a few that were approved. This lot in particular, and your application in particular, can you put that against other approved uses? Let's start with a gas station. What's the intensity makeup versus a gas station of this application?
Well, I mean, the gas station's clearly going to be having truck deliveries. Most gas stations are at least going to have today low fuel or low volume diesel. So you're going to have diesel and gas vehicles on site. And, you know, that's a type of facility that's going to generate on Route 22 that sees 60,000 cars a day. Tremendous amount of activity in and out of those facilities. We historically don't see many auto repair shops today, so you usually see a convenience aspect with the gas station. So you're going to have a retail use with people coming out. So there'll be a lot more traffic going in and out of a property than a self-storage facility. And I testified the first time is that, at least I've been a part of several of these applications, and I've also been on these facilities as a board planner and visiting properties where I reviewed being expanded. And I also testified that I've been on a property in Morristown that was built, where I was out there doing a drone test for a cell tower. So I was on the property on and off for about 2 hours, and I don't recall seeing a car. I said maybe one come onto the facility, because once the facilities get filled, there's very little activity that occurs. There's a period, it takes a number of months. You have to talk to the applicant, how long that usually occurs. But once they're filled, there's very little activity occurs, and that's why I believe it's a great transitionary land use to residential, because they're passive. The building also has a value in that it's a noise wall to residential as well. So if you're going to have a use next to a residential area, there's really not a use that's commercial that's more passive than this, and that's why it's a great fit.
So all the approved uses for this property, it's your testimony that this is the least intensive use?
Yes.
How about versus something like an apartment building? And, you know, you can kind of fill in how many units would be approved there, but it's a quarter-mile long lot. What's your opinion that how many apartments, 1,000-square-foot apartments could fit on a site like this?
Well, I didn't really do that type of analysis to give a number, but we know that residential uses create less traffic than commercial land use, but it's still going to generate activity, more activity than would occur from a self-storage facility. So
They would have different impacts, such as to the school districts and otherwise.
Oh, if it was a fiscal impact report, if that's where you're just discussing, obviously, you know, when we look at cost to a municipality, you know, the largest cost that a municipality has is the school district, usually around 60%. A town like Bridgewater likely pays over $15,000 a child. So if you had 100 units here, 1 and 2 bedroom homes, you can anticipate you're going to have, I don't know, probably less than 10 children. A single-family home with 3 bedrooms or more, you can anticipate over a child, a home, generally speaking. So there would be significantly more cost. Your master plan, I mean, the zoning board doesn't make decisions on fiscal purposes, but when you plan and you plan for zoning, it's appropriate to plan for economic development. That's why you have areas of growth centers and the like, and that's why I talked about the 2010 master plan that is discussed as an economic development corridor for the township. So based on that, a slightly larger building would provide a greater economic development instead than a smaller building. So I said there are some positives if it works in the scale and it fits onto the site. There are benefits, at least fiscally, from that.
Okay. I want to ask you a question on the FAR and the steep slopes for Bridgewater. I'm kind of fond of the steep slope ordinance, and I view it just as a zoning board member and something that is to inhibit development of raw property or hillside type property. And we've gone to court with this, and we've had success with it. In your opinion, in the spirit, and I know you've read that the steep slopes ordinance, the spirit of that, in your opinion, does it play more to developed land or land that has not been developed? And how does that difference interplay here with this application?
That ordinance speaks more to undeveloped land, and you have specific standards discussed in section 126, 265 that discuss, if you're going to build in these areas, when it's appropriate. And the site engineer went through those 7 points. It's control velocity and rate of water runoff, and I can go through each and every one of them. One wasn't applicable, but we provided testimony that we achieve all those points of the ordinance.
And can you reiterate to the board what the FAR level is when you remove that basement, that sub-basement off of the calculation, take it out of the denominator?
I don't have that exact calculation.
Approximately?
But it's about a third of the base floor, and we have 3. Are the floors equal though? If you're basing the calculation, I'm going to do some rough math here on the fly. If you're basing the calculation on the steep slope area of 0.693. That amounts to about 0.231 per floor. If you take about a third of that minus, brings it to closer to about 0.6, 0.61. That's
When you pull out the steep slopes?
when you pull out the steep slopes, and if you don't consider the portion of the building that's underground. That's a rough approximation.
Is this project impacting the slopes on the property?
We can bring the site engineer up, but I don't believe.
Just looking for your opinion here.
I don't believe it is. If anything, the slopes are being stabilized, and through the stormwater management that's advancing, and I think it's improving off-site conditions. All engineers, I mean, that's what they do. They're going to stabilize this property, improve it from a stormwater perspective. So there's not going to be a harmful detriment to the slopes of this property, if that's your question.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ricky. Other board questions, please?
Yeah, I have a question for you. For other self-storage facilities, I assume you've done several of them. Is this about the average size of the ones that you do? I know this is a small piece of property.
I'm really not the best person to answer that. I've been a part of probably like 4 or 5. The closest one was, I guess it would be North Plainfield on Route 22, close to like going past like the Walmart Center there on the right, coming westbound on 22. That was a 4-story facility that there was a good amount of concern about. But it was an area that was like tucked between tree lines. And, you know, I said the board was concerned it was going to appear very large and out of scale. And I gave reasons why I didn't think that would be the case based on the setback.
It's North Plainfield on 22?
Yeah, it's 4 stories it was. So if you're coming on 22, you go past the old furniture store, if it's still there, then you go past the Home Depot, the Walmart
Oh,
plaza.
yeah, it's down.
And it's
farther-
right past there on the right.
It's down in Watchung, really.
It's in it's technically, I believe that's North
On that
Plainfield
place, it's
there.
on the westbound side. I passed it yesterday.
I think it ends up being North Plainfield.
Right, okay.
That's where it's,
I saw yesterday, I'm familiar with that one.
I mean, that was a 4-story facility.
How big is that piece of property?
See, I don't recall those details, and I would have to look at my file.
It's not a big piece of property there.
I don't want to, I don't know. It's been a few years there. That's the closest one, that's why I mentioned it.
Okay.
But, I'm a planner in several towns, and, sometimes it's tough to scale the facility because some of the older facilities, maybe 1 story and take up large areas, but they may not have a lot of square footage, so you probably have to really bring the applicant up, the provider, if you really wanted those.
Yeah, I mean, I want to try to help, because this question was asked by to both Mr. Lang as the applicant or operator and Mr. Nusella as the architect, and the testimony was that this is generally in line with the average size, but what is unique here is that because of the shape of the property, a rectangular, square, whatever, could not be developed, so the usable space of this footprint is smaller than it would be on a percentage-wise, be able to construct on a similar size.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Rich, you good? All right, board professionals, questions for Mr. Ricky?
I just had one question, or one clarification, rather. Can you just repeat what you'd mentioned about the FAR for the zone in relation to other zones?
In other zones, I think it was, I talked about the impervious coverage where, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect where in the M1B, where self-storage facilities are permitted, they're permitted at a FAR of 0.35, but they have an improvement coverage of 60%. And I think if anything, the board recognizes from this application is that these facilities have a low need for parking and the like. So unless you're going to allow them to park a lot of boats and trailers out there, a self-storage facility does not have that need. And I think there's some benefit, maybe from a visual perspective, in this environment, not to encourage boats and things of that nature, but to have more building area in having an enclosed building. So the FAR that was mentioned last time in the M1B is 0.35 where this use is permitted.
Thank you. And then just one other thing. I hate to make you math again, but if this proposed use and structure were to be compliant as proposed, with the footprint proposed, how many stories could the building be?
Well, it would be lower. It depends on how I answer that because, it could spread on a larger percentage of the lot as well. So I'm not sure if I can really answer that on the fly.
And it wasn't meant to be a trick question. It's just when you,
I understand your question too. When you say compliant, you just mean with respect to that,
to the FAR,
Variance?
to the FAR.
just to the FAR, okay.
Because we've been asking, the hypotheticals that have been kind of swirling around where if you took out the basement story, if you did this, if you did that, and in particular, what jumps out to me is that a 0.25 FAR relates to a number for this site without the steep slopes and things of about 37,400. The building footprint's about 35,000, so it would be it'd have to be single story, no basement, no second floor. It would be 1 story at the footprint proposed. So just a consideration as we're talking about the hypotheticals and thinking through how FAR relates to the way the site is.
When you bring in the other bulk variances, that blows up.
No, as proposed.
Okay.
So with all the variances, as the footprint's proposed, that's the square footage you have for the footprint. And it would be 1 story, like I said, no basement structure, no second story, just 1 story.
That's a really good point. So let's go back to your contention that, on the reverse condemnation question, can this property be built in that configuration that is economically viable, it doesn't need a variance.
Well, I can't, I mean, we heard from Mr. Lang, and, I mean, the testimony he provided, they're not going to build a building of that size. It's just too small. It's not going to work.
But it can be done.
Excuse me?
But it can be done, just not economically.
It could be done, yes. Anything could be built smaller, for sure.
Right.
The other, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Just had one quick question, Paul. At the last hearing in April, you provided testimony, I think, on 13 variances total. There were 2 Ds and then I think 11 C or bulk variances. Does that number still hold true tonight?
That's what we have, yes.
Okay, so nothing's changed since the last meeting. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. All right, we're going to open this up to members of the public that have questions on Mr. Ricky's planning testimony. Come on down. All right, seeing none. Ms. Westlake, would you like to ask some questions on Cross? You're good for now? All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Melnick.
Mr. Chairman, we will open it up to the public, reserving our right to give a summation following the comment.
We can do that, sure. All right, at this point, I'd like to open up to members of the public that would like to speak for or against this application. Give you as much time as you want at the microphone. You can talk about this case. This is your time. If we can just get your name for the record again, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rosalind Westlake, and I'm here on behalf of Arthur Self Storage, objecting to the application.
Can we get the address for Arthur Self Storage? Can we get the address of Arthur Self Storage?
Greenbrook?
It's Greenbrook, New Jersey?
Yes.
Thank you.
Generally speaking, it seems clear that the driving force behind the proposed development is to construct a building that is economically feasible for the applicant. It is not to construct a building that can be accommodated by this particular lot. And as you know, economic feasibility is not the standard to be applied by this board. I would concede that the lot is absolutely oddly shaped and it presents a challenge for development, but there is an existing building on the lot that could very easily be adaptively reused. It could be a medical office. It could be, it would complement the adjacent existing assisted living facility next door to the west. The site, as conceded by Mr. Ricci, could in fact be developed with a 30 to 40,000 square foot building where it would meet the FAR. And I would certainly suggest that a large number of the bulk variances could absolutely be met at that point in time. And in the event that most of the bulk variances could be met, I think the idea of a possible use variance certainly would be much more palatable in that context. But again, it's not that it's an absolutely undevelopable lot. It has been developed. It could be adaptively reused, and it is feasible to develop it in some other fashion with a building that would largely comply. All of the variances, or nearly all of the variances here, are self-created variances, which is, again, not the standard by which this board should be considering whether this is a good use or an appropriate use for this particular lot. The requested FAR is more than 3 times the maximum of what this town allows. It's for the zone, my apologies. It's 0.25 in this zone. They are seeking 0.90. That's an awfully significant change in what is requested. There are, of course, also substantial safety concerns that were raised during the cross-examination of the engineer relating to the ingress and egress to this site. Because there have been no changes, they are stuck. The site itself currently has old standards for highway access that no longer comply with NJDOT standards. There are also safe parking safe site circulation issues relating to having the loading spaces in the front, people backing into a lane of traffic, K-turns in the parking areas, and so on, which I would suggest are not the top approach to safety for site circulation or site ingress and egress. From a planning perspective, I will, just for purposes of the record, challenge the testimony, or the opinion rather, of the professional planner relating to the need for office space. There was no testimony provided by a real estate professional relating to the need or lack thereof of office space in Bridgewater Township on Route 22. So I would argue that that was a net opinion. Obviously, attorneys will disagree on that issue, but just for the record, that would be my position, that that is a net opinion. Additionally, I was not able to locate anywhere in the testimony provided, technically speaking, what operational testimony was provided to support the variance for 2 loading spaces. 4 loading spaces are required for that particular location, and there was no actual factual testimony to support a planner's opinion that that, in fact, would be an appropriate variance. So again, just sort of for the record. Finally,
I don't mean to interrupt you, just so we don't.
certainly,
So you're saying 4 are required, and they're only proposing 2?
correct. That's what I saw in the application, and I'm sure Mr. Melnick will correct me if I'm wrong. I did not hear any testimony from the operations director as to how 2 would suffice for the location.
Where did you get your 4 required from?
From the ordinance and also from your planner.
This will be to them later, why they didn't address that.
Finally, I would argue that the planner has failed to address probably the most significant policy statements made in your 2022 master plan. He did rely heavily on statements in the 2010 and 2004 master plan relating to self-storage and enhancing economic benefits along Route 22 and so on. And I understand that, enhancing the tax base. However, I would also say that your 2022 master plan specifically looked into the issue of warehouses, specifically determined where it wanted self-storage, and it specifically did not change or recommend that self-storage or warehouses be along Route 22. I think Mr. Ricci made an incredibly eloquent argument in favor of changing your master plan. However, your own township passed a master plan less than 3 years ago, in 2022, that says, we don't want this type of use, we don't want this type of style building, we don't want them on Route 22, and accordingly, I would say that it's an inappropriate use of the property. In sum, the plan is an excessive overdevelopment of the existing lot, and if allowed, it will give this applicant and this property owner an unfair competitive advantage relative to every other property owner along Route 22. And I respectfully request this board to deny the application. Thank you very much for your time. Certainly.
Yeah, I guess you're a lawyer?
Yes, I am.
Would you happen to know what the office space vacancy is in Somerset County or New Jersey?
No, I don't. I would have to call a real estate professional and ask them to provide testimony on that issue.
Well, as I drive around, I see a lot of empty storefronts and a lot of empty buildings. I think you started your dialogue by saying that this space could be developed for office space. And I'm saying, I'm not sure the climate right now warrants developing office space.
And that's absolutely your opinion, and I would just say that your ordinance has spoken specifically to those issues. Your master plan has spoken to those issues. Permitted uses are office and medical. The building itself is physically, structurally capable of being adaptively reused as a medical office building. If your master plan stated otherwise, I would probably not be up here arguing with you. But because your master plan in 2022 specifically evaluated this whole issue and made a decision, that's what I would want to
Do you
defer to.
recall if the 2022 master plan was a re-evaluation, or was it a passing of a master plan? Because right now, the administration is working on the master plan, and one's up for adoption relatively soon. Maybe, Catherine, you could speak to, in 2022, we did not pass a master plan. That was a re-examination.
It was a re-examination report, which is essentially there's like 5 statutorily required sections of a master plan re-examination, and it looks at the goals from the last master plans, looks at any kind of changes and assumptions or policies that have happened locally, regionally, statewide, and then also makes additional recommendations. Generally, the purview of a re-examination report is much more limited than a comprehensive.
What was the last master plan that was passed by the planning board and township council, Bridgewater? I have 2015 in my notes here.
I think it might have been
16?
not the full master plan, no.
Okay.
That was 2010.
It might have been 2005.
The-
There's many amendments and
Re-examination.
reports that were done over time. The 2022 master plan re-exam report actually did make the recommendation to do a full master plan because
Right,
it hadn't been done in so long.
Ms. Westlake, I just wanted to make sure that the board had the proper information. It was re-examination, but very solid point. Thank you.
No, I understand.
It wasn't a full master plan in 22.
I sit in your seat in my own town, and we just did our re-exam, so I get it.
Thank you very much.
Again, thank all of you very much for your time, and thank you, Steve. I appreciate your courtesy.
Thank you, Ms. Westlake. Mr. Chairman would like me to respond to that now or wait for all public comment?
It's your application.
All right, I'll be very brief. There's a couple of things that need to be on the record and respond to the comments of Ms. Westlake. First, Ms. Westlake identified economic feasibility as a standard that this board cannot use in determining whether to grant a variance, and I would agree with that. What I would also suggest, though, that there is no commercial applicant that would be before this board if their motivations was not economic benefit. That should be distinguished, though, from the necessary proofs that have to be made in order to warrant a variance being granted. So while the applicant's motivation is, of course, business and economic incentives for them, that doesn't mean that that is what they're suggesting be the reason for why the variances should be granted. Mr. Ricky testified at the last hearing and tonight extensively about the positive criteria that will come from this development, and we suggest that those are the reasons for why the variance should be granted, not economic feasibility. She also suggested that the building be adaptively reused, but she herself did not present any testimony about the conditions of that building or about whether or not it can be engineered to be adaptively reused. She identified the variances as self-created. I don't think there's any evidence at all that these are self-created. Usually that is a phrase that we use to describe variances that come after a property owner has either subdivided a property into a condition that it now creates variances where it didn't before, and it came to those variances. That's not the case here. There's no evidence that the applicant in this case did. In fact, it's bordered by municipal roads to 3 sides of it. So they're not self-created variances. She suggested that the board should deny the variances because there are open issues regarding parking and circulation issues, and she addressed what I wrote down quickly, there may have been others, as loading issues and K-turns without identifying what those issues are or why they're violations of your ordinance. And finally, we do contend that all 13 variances that are currently being offered were properly testified to with substantial credible evidence, including the 2 loading variances that have been identified. I will point out that initially, Ms. Doyle, in her initial review letter, did not identify this as a variance. It was subsequently identified as a variance and then testified to that the requirement in the ordinance that requires that number of loading spaces is also in a section which does not contemplate self-storage. And the testimony from the applicant, both the architect as well as the operator, was that the demand for those loading spaces and the low traffic here does not warrant more than the 2 that's being proposed. So that's the response I'll provide.
Thank you. Next course of action.
Are there any other members of the public?
Any other members of the public like to speak for or against this application? All right, seeing none.
If not, I'd just like to quickly thank the board for its patience and attention over these many hearings. As the board will recall, and I hope will agree with me in saying that this applicant has done a good job in listening to what was said and modifying the plans on several occasions to go from what was once 25 or 26 variances now down to 13, and of those 13, many of them have been mitigated through a much reduced floor area. The applicant here has owned this property in Bridgewater for many decades, and the application here is intended to keep that the case for many more years to come with a very experienced and successful operator in Snapbox. It is agreed that if this application were to be approved to several specific conditions, including limitations on the use to ensure that the units do not be used for warehouse spaces, annual certification of the maintenance of the detention basin, landscaping improvements working with the township professionals, a requirement that leases prohibit hazardous materials, and of course, most importantly, that the applicant will install stormwater mitigation techniques far above what is required by state and municipal requirements. We contend that the applicant has met its burden of proof on all the variances, and that with those conditions of approval, this is an opportunity for this property to be redeveloped in a way that is a well-suited, passive use, low traffic demands, serves a community need, meets the master plan's goal of economic development for this area, and again, most importantly, greatly improves the stormwater conditions of this area in town, and we ask that the board approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melnick. Someone had mentioned storage outside, and just wanted to clarify with you, do we have a stipulation that there'll be no storage outside, like a boat or a
outdoor
trailer? There is no outdoor storage. Could we just put that as a stipulation?
We're fine with that.
Thank you. And Rich, if you could take us through the other stipulations so the board has that information going into deliberation.
If the board were inclined to vote in favor of this application, there are and would be several, I have 24 conditions that were discussed, and we can discuss further. One was that there'd be a deed restriction indicating that the property owner would maintain the detention basin. Some of these conditions are rather minor, and some of them we may have addressed already, but would include street number on the sign detail.
Mhm.
On the sign, of course. Hours for customer access would be 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days per week. Office hours, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Saturdays. Add no parking signs along the interior roadway. Comply with other agency comments, such as our sewer utility. Again, some of these are standard conditions as well. Comply with the township professional planner and township engineer's conditions from their reports. Change the fencing to be black aluminum fence, not a chain link. Reduce lighting intensity to the township engineer's satisfaction. There'd be no overnight parking. No forklifts would be used on the site. Cannot alter the unit designs to combine units. All deliveries from any carriers may only be delivered to the office and may not be directly delivered to or picked up from the storage unit. Signage so indicating shall be installed in locations deemed acceptable to the township planner and township engineer. Units shall be used for self-storage only by the unit lessee and shall not be used as a distribution or warehouse facility. Unit lessees may not have any employees working from within the self-storage unit. Update sign package to show current signs and that each are compliant. With respect to landscaping, planting shrub height shall be at least 3 feet and tree height at least 12 to 15 feet. And revised landscaping plan shall be forwarded to the township professional planners and would be her satisfaction. Spacing of landscaping would also be compliant. The EV space shall be a public access charging station. We would modify the type of evergreen trees to the township planner's satisfaction. The building lights along the southerly and westerly sides of the building shall be on motion sensors. DOT, we would have to obtain DOT approval or a letter of no interest. Along the northerly elevation, which is along Donahue Road, no windows shall cast any light. All windows along that elevation shall be a faux window
Only two comments to two of those. One, I believe what you said is the EV space must be public access. I think the agreement was that we didn't want public access. We wanted to limit it to our customers. And then on the west side, on the stormwater, we were committed to investigating whatever we can do with those dry wells, and to the extent we can, we will do that.
You were going to work with the township engineer, Mr. Burr, on that. You okay?
Yep.
All right.
Otherwise, all good with us.
All right. Mr. Melick, if you're done, we're going to open this up to board deliberations, and we can take it from there. All right, thank you. Mr. Widley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good.
Good.
I'm glad we're finally coming to an end to this long application. I'm only going to talk for a minute or so because it's been going on. We started this many months ago. I don't remember when because we have several applications. And I pass the property probably between 15 and 20 times a week. So ever since we started, I take this vision of what's going to go there. So when you first came and gave your first application to us a while ago, I couldn't even imagine this whole big project that you were trying to do. Because you have a small office area, you have the retention basin and everything, and it's an odd piece of property, which you all recognize. So as our great board does, and I've been on this board for probably over 10 years now, I lost track, we often ask, and the applicant does listen to us and comes back several times in this case, and looks at what we're trying to get to as an acceptable modification to what your original application is. And in my opinion, in this case, you went above and beyond what we asked for. You shrunk it down a little, even more than you came down to where I really wanted it to be. And you put the shrubbery, you changed everything. So just in summary, I commend you for that, and I will support the application.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to be quick as well. Just in my notes, Mr. Ricky's testimony held a lot of weight. The massive decrease in trip volume, that's noticeable. And it really, I joke around sometimes with the board members and I say, what's the least stinky diaper? And, sometimes, what you want and what you get are two different things. Not to connotate this application with a stinky diaper, but, just in retrospect, you're looking for the most beneficial use of the property that checks all the boxes. And for me, what protects the neighborhood the most? And I think this application truly does protect the neighborhood. In fact, I think it does it better than the original building did. You're going to go, and I have 1,300 plus plantings. And frankly, when you look at the planting array on the plan, you can't find a single piece of area that doesn't have a planting on it. That's substantial. My biggest concern in terms of the intent of the township master plan and the township the code is, no warehousing. The township council's made it very clear with their interpretation and their recent passing of ordinances that prohibit warehousing. And you've stipulated that there'll be no forklifts, no distribution, and no outside storage. The existing building's dilapidated. And I'm not an expert in building conditions, but you drive by it, it's dilapidated. Literally, there's cement and concrete and masonry coming off the building. The building is dangerous and it needs to be replaced. In terms of the FAR, I spoke to that with Mr. Ricky, and I believe that the steep slopes ordinance, which Mr. Sweeney raises a very good point, and I think it's something that the board needs to take very seriously, and I think with each vote, I think you need to consider this FAR calculation and what the intent is. What the intent, in terms of my vote, is we're trying to protect the greenery and the mountaintops and the development that exists at the higher elevations in Bridgewater Township to a degree where you look up and there's still trees there. This is already a disturbed piece of property. Mr. Ricky and Mr. Winters both testified that the existing slopes will not be impacted. And when you pull back the basement, the sub-level, the third level, that's only minorly envisioned on the western side of the property, it takes that FAR down substantially. I have it down as 0.501. I'm not nearly an expert, but that's a 50% differential almost to what is being proposed on the 0.905. I think that is pretty much it for me. In terms of the parking spaces, Mr. Ricky's quote, 467 parking spots for a medical facility. That's an approved use. That trip differential, that parking differential is massive. So jumping just to the D1 criteria, and you go right to the negative criteria, is this a substantial detriment to the public good? If anything, with the drainage and the calculations on the improvement of the stormwater, it's inverse to that. It's actually a huge improvement to the public good. Hopefully Vossler Avenue will no longer flood from this. I think Mr. Burr's testimony was the fact that he felt that it would be substantially improved and would be safer. Is there substantial impairment to the intent and the purpose of the zone plan? And that's going to come down to each board member, and I think they have to ask themselves, in that FAR calculation, and specifically the steep slopes, what is the spirit of that? And I've been on this board for a long time. I believe that spirit and the intent, and where we've used it and where it's been tested in the appellate court, has been to hinder developers from building large homes on steep slopes. So with all those points that I've made, I'm going to vote in favor of this project. I'm going to throw it down to Mr. Kulak. I see you down there. Good evening, sir.
Thank you very much. I want to start on the premise that this lot by itself, and when it was described by the planner, is essentially undevelopable in that there's one area, if you adhere to all the setbacks, that's the size approximately of a porta potty where something could be constructed. So the building that exists today and serves a purpose as an office building is already non-compliant. They're faced with a lot that is so unusually shaped, it provides a hardship by itself. So then the question is, how can we build something there, which certainly the owner of the property has a right to develop it and maintains that right? How can it be developed in a way that benefits the township, benefits the community? We didn't hear much from the public tonight, but we heard from them in the past, and their single biggest concern was stormwater management and drainage. And we know from the testimony of the applicant that this is going to be substantially improved beyond the standards that they would be required to adhere to at the minimum level. So they're doing much more than that. And that's a step up and something that will protect the public. When I look at the FAR calculation, which is something that has been brought up often, if you imagine that ground floor was covered with dirt, as opposed to the two parts of it that are exposed because of the grading of the land, then it wouldn't be counted. And I think the spirit of the calculation should not include that, although technically we are including it. We're just choosing, should it be approved, to look at it somewhat differently. And based on the testimony of the planners, we know that FAR is meant to really describe in a way the intensity of use and also the mass. And we've also heard testimony and can judge ourselves whether that's in fact going to be reducing the intensity of the site and reducing the mass as it might appear. And I would argue that it does. So I would urge the board to vote in the affirmative on this and approve this project and look at it as something that was an improvement and something that would protect the public and the nearby neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kulak. Mr. Gavitt, good evening.
Good evening.
Your thoughts, please.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to echo, oh, wow, that's loud. Okay, I'm going to echo that I think the stormwater runoff factor is important. And to your point, it is an improvement. And you also had brought up the dilapidation of the current building, and yeah, it's not in great shape. Again, being the new kid on the board, some of this is a little bit of a learning experience for me as well. My only big concern would be, again, the shape of the lot is weird, and that makes it difficult to, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. It makes it difficult to get something that's going to be compliant to you, the porta potty reference. So it's kind of a what can you do with it?
Would you be inclined to vote in favor, or are you against it?
I would lean in favor.
Okay. I want to hear that's all I need to know. Thank you. Mr. Seacat, good evening.
I'm sympathetic to the, current lot and the way it is, and to really do anything feasible with that. I appreciate the level of improvements that are going to be undertaken by the applicant as proposed. And And I don't feel the intensity of use for a self-storage building is as high as maybe some people think. So I have a tendency to support the application.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with everyone's statements. I do think that it's the low-intensity nature of the use, which really makes a lot of sense for that zone. All the improvements that are being made to the stormwater management in that area, the fact that we saw fewer and fewer members of the township here as you were working with them to make sure it was something that was more aesthetically pleasing for them, and the improvements that are going to be made to that area, I think justifies voting in favor of this application.
Buongiorno. Good evening.
I think my fellow board members have pretty much covered all of the areas that were of concern to me, and I'm in favor of the applicant.
Mrs. Amin. I don't think we've ever had an application with more. Thank you. Mr. Sweeney.
I think well, I don't think, other board members have spoken eloquently about the positive aspects of this development, or proposed development. And I think most of those comments are right on. I think it's certainly a less intense use than some of the other options, and I like that. But where I come out on this is, despite the changes that have been made since we saw the original proposal, the project is still too big. I mean, it's considerably, according to the testimony we heard, it would be considerably larger than the smaller operations that this operator currently has in the self-storage space, which to me says that, hey, they could make a buck on this even if it were smaller. And that's the only problem I have with this application. It's too big. It's too big. If they were to come back with something that minimized the excesses, I'd look at this very, very differently. And I understand that you can't put anything on this property that meets all of the guidelines, because it would make the property undevelopable. And I'm not looking to do that. But I do think there's a lot of room to bring this proposal more closely in line with what the ordinance allows. So I will vote no on this application.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Fresco.
Substantial stormwater improvements, 10% reduction in impervious. You preserved trees. The final design improvements required less variances. The planning testimony highlighted the benefits over other possibilities. I think the design improvements were fantastic. I think you really, honestly, I would not be in favor of this with that original design. You came back, you made it look more like an office building. You sold the idea that you made the height lower. And I'm convinced that there really are limited uses there, and that, obviously as a business owner and investor myself, it needs to be this big for you to make money. I think, and I'm rarely one to compliment the attorneys on these things, but I really do think you did a fantastic job. I really do. I think you guys listened carefully and you responded. And this stuff, we don't take this stuff lightly. We have neighbors that are there, the residents that were here, and I actually think it's going to be a nice looking site. I really do. Yeah, it is big. And honestly, I'm not crazy about the parking. I think you could have squeezed a few more spots in there. But I think that there's enough positives here that the guy that owns the land has a right to develop it, and this looks like a great business owner, answered everything, was honest, straightforward. So, I feel like you guys did a great job, and you earned earn our support. So good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Fresco. All right, Rich, I heard 24 conditions/stipulations and 13 bulks and 2 use?
2 use, 2 Ds and 11 Cs.
13 net. Gotcha. All right. Based on deliberations of this board, I would entertain a motion to approve.
I move.
That was Mr. Wiley. Do I have a second motion to approve?
Second.
Mr. Bongiorno? Thank you. Catherine, could we get a vote on that, please?
Chairman Foose,
Yes.
Vice Chair Weidley,
Yes.
Ms. Amin, Mr. Sweeney,
No.
Mr. Fresco,
Yes.
Mr. Bongiorno? Yes. Mr. Gieske? Yes. Motion passes.
All right, Mr. Melnick.
Very much.
Good luck. Thank you. All right, we're gonna do Belly next. If we could just take a quick break. I have the time, let's call it 8:30. Why don't we start 8:45, council? All right, thank you. We're gonna adjourn. If you'd be so kind to call the roll, please.
Chairman Foose,
Here?
Mr. Widley,
Here.
Ms. Amin. Mr. Sweeney,
Here.
Mr. Fresco.
Yes, here.
Mr. Bongiorno. Here. Mr. Gieske. Here. Mr. Sakat.
Here.
Mr. Kulak.
Here.
Mr. Vesio absent. Mr. Gabbett. Here. Mr. Aller. Here. Mr. Burr. Here. And Ms. Sarmad here.
All right, thank you very much. All right, Belly Holdings, long time coming, Block 249, Lot 40, 19 through 21, Mount Pleasant Avenue. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Chairman. Brian Plocker from the firm of Hutch, Shermanowitz and Plocker here on behalf of the applicant, Belly Holdings LLC, and it has been a long time coming.
Yes. Mr. Plocker, I have to tell you that the last case we did not expect to be finished tonight. We had objectors that had brought witnesses to the last meeting. We thought that would be running out the clock tonight. We're glad you stuck around and persevered to be with us. First thing I'd like to do when we open up a new case is to check notice, and Mr. Aller can help you out with that. I know we've done that previously with the carries, but I just want to get it on the record that all the neighbors are notified and satisfied.
So, Mr. Chairman, the original mailings were back in November 30th, 23, and published on the same day. Notice was in proper form, was served properly. Once the application was scheduled, we continually announced it, so the board retains jurisdiction.
That's accurate. Thank you, Mr. Aller.
All right. The other issue that we have outstanding is our township zoning officer has let me know that apparently they wanted to issue some citations for overgrown lawn, abandoned furniture. Could you update the board on the status of that and where you're at with the township?
Yes, I did receive an email from the township zoning officer. I want to say about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I forwarded that to a client representative. It was taken care of that weekend, and your zoning officer did email me back and acknowledge that from pictures I did forward to him, that any property maintenance issues were taken care
So
of.
he's been satisfied and those are no longer issues on the properties?
As far as I know.
All right. Well, he's not here, so I'm going to take your word for it.
And as per my client, there are no issues, any maintenance issues that did exist, because it is an older property that is in need of some improvement or repair or replacement.
All right.
But he, at least in his email back to me, said from the pictures he seemed to be satisfied. There has been an intervening 2 to 4 weeks, and I have not heard from him again, and I don't believe my client has heard from him.
Silence is acceptance?
Silence is sometimes a positive thing.
All right. Thank you for the update, and to your case, please proceed.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board, Mr. Chairman. I just have a very brief correction from what's in the agenda, and then just a very brief intro before I call my first witness. So the applicant is here tonight. Just to be clear, we are seeking a bifurcated use variance under the municipal land use law, and I know there are some new members on the board. Tonight, we are just seeking the D use variances to see if the board would entertain the particular townhome use that is proposed. We have not filed a fully engineered site plan. If a use variance is granted, it would be this board's jurisdiction to then hear a subsequently filed separate site plan application. However, obviously, the board will have site plan concerns, stormwater drainage, things of that in a general nature. We do have our engineer to address those items generally, but I just want to be clear that there is not a fully engineered site plan on file because this is in fact a bifurcated application, but we will gladly address and discuss those site plan related details and issues. The correction I have is that it is in the agenda as 14 units of townhomes are proposed. It's actually pursuant to a revised plan, 22 townhouses contained in 4 separate buildings, comprising 2 buildings containing 4 units each and 2 buildings containing 7 units each. The zone we're in, which is the single-family R10 zone, only permits single-family housing, not townhomes. So accordingly, the applicant is here tonight on a bifurcated basis seeking a D1 use variance, and because these are higher density townhomes, maximum floor ratio variance under section 70D4 and a density variance under 70D5. And to be clear that if any variance relief was granted, we would have to come back before this board with a fully engineered site plan and seek site plan approval.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, absolutely, sir.
These would be multiple story, not just everything on one floor.
Correct. Correct, and we do have our architect here as well
Townhouse
to
means
explain.
multiple condos, townhouses. Okay.
Yes, and just a little bit of introduction about the property before I get to my first witness. The property is very uniquely situated. Where it lies between an existing garden apartment complex of 394 units. It's known as the Mount Pleasant Villas. That's owned by Meadowbrook Village at Bridgewater to the east, and to the west, but not accessible from Mount Pleasant Avenue, which is the road that is required to access the subject property, are single-family homes to the west. Like I said, access to the property is via Main Street in a northerly direction up Mount Pleasant Avenue. That also uniquely is a private road. It is owned by the garden apartment owners, Meadowbrook Village at Bridgewater. As part of this application, the board required the owner to consent to this application and sign off on the application. The owner has done that. Additionally, because it is a private road, obviously there are easement concerns. My client and the owner have entered into an easement agreement pursuant to which the owner and/or ultimate user and users of the property or owners will be able to traverse the private Mount Pleasant Avenue to access the subject property in a lawful manner. And hand in hand with that, there is an agreement to fund towards the continued maintenance and repair of Mount Pleasant Avenue, as long as it remains a private road and not something that would become a public road, which would be taken by the town. But as of today, there are no plans for the road to become public. Just a little bit more about the unique nature of the property. We really look, and you'll hear from the professionals during this public hearing, that the property is really in a transition zone. It is the northernmost property on Mount Pleasant Avenue. It borders the garden apartments, to the north of the garden apartments, across the street of the garden apartments. As far as access to the subject property and that area, Mount Pleasant only contains currently 3 single-family homes to the south of the subject property, and then the 394 garden apartments that I mentioned. The single-family development to the west does not have any direct access to Mount Pleasant Avenue. So it really is a transition zone where there are the garden apartments. We are now proposing a lower density use of townhomes and then transition to the single-family. And you'll hear plenty of testimony from our professionals during the hearing in that regard. And like I said, this is the very last lot on Mount Pleasant Avenue. It's not between the newer single-family homes to the south, but it's really on the cusp of the driveway, the entrance to the garden apartments. Unless there are any questions or other housekeeping issues, I am ready to call our first witness.
I got a question. The slide we're looking at says proposal is to construct 14 townhomes. Did you say 22?
It is 22, and that 22-unit plan has been on file since prior to the time that we noticed for the hearing in December.
So 22 is correct?
It is correct.
All right, thank you.
And that is what is currently shown on the plan filed with the board.
Was there an original plan that had 14?
There was. When the application was first filed, it did show 14 units, correct.
Can you just answer one quick question, please, which is why the bifurcated approach?
Well, it is a process and procedure that is permitted by the land use law. Obviously, a full engineering of the site takes up a great amount of resources. So my client decided, instead of just assuming that relief would be granted, we could present what we envision for the property regarding the townhome use. And if relief is granted as a part of this hearing, it is this board which would hear the site plan application.
Thank you.
So let me just address that a little bit with the board, and I agree. Like, the municipal land use law does allow an applicant to bifurcate an application for use variance, and that's what they're asking you to do, to look at the concept plan and consent to or approve the use that they're proposing, including a number of units, and then if you were to approve that, they would come back to this board with a full preliminary and final site plan, fully engineered, right? But I would also advise that if during the process of the hearing, you had site plan related questions, we could require that of the applicant to provide that to you so that you could make an informed decision on the application.
Thank you.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do, Counselor. Thank you.
Mr. Plucker, can you tell us how many times this board has granted a bifurcated proposal such as this in the last decade?
I cannot do that, Mr. Chairman.
I can. Would you like to know that answer? Zero. Okay,
We will keep that in mind as these hearings proceed.
great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there aren't any further questions, I'd like to call our engineer, Edward Deck.
So Ed, would you please stand? I'm going to ask our professionals to stand too. If you guys would raise your hand, we just do that all at the same time. You solemnly swear that the testimony you will give to this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
And Ed, just for the record, state your name.
Edward, middle initial S, last name Deck, D-E-C.
Thank you. And ours?
William Burr, Township Engineer.
Thank you.
Mr. Deck, if you could briefly offer your qualifications to the board.
Certainly. Graduate of New Jersey Institute of Technology. I'm a graduate. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. Graduate of the New Jersey Institute of Technology, a licensed professional civil engineer and land surveyor, and a certified municipal engineer. I've been a municipal engineer in 2 municipalities, Union County, Borough of Roselle Park, and the Township of Cranford. I am the principal owner of Guariel and Deck Associates. Been licensed since 1993. I've appeared in numerous boards within Union, Somerset, and Middlesex counties. I've designed multifamily, commercial, and residential sites.
And your license is current?
My license is current.
Have you testified in Bridgewater previously?
No, I haven't.
Any towns contiguous or in our county?
Yes, definitely in the county. Somerville, Ranchburg.
That's good. This board accepts you as a professional engineer. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Deck, you did prepare the concept plan that's currently on file with the board?
Yes.
Okay, could you please explain to the board generally the use that is being proposed, the general layout, and...
Certainly. The site, which is Lot 40, Block 249, is 1.24 acres. It's, as pointed out by the attorney, Mr. Blocker, we have access to the site off of Mount Pleasant Road, which is a private roadway, and we do have the necessary permissions granted from the owner of the roadway for access to our property. Currently, the site is vacant except for that single-family structure that's there. It's predominantly wooded, has a gradient from the east to the west, or from plan orientation from the bottom of the lot or frontage of the lot to the rear of the lot, which would be the west side, about a 2 to 3% slope. There are no significant environmental constraints on the property. We did have an environmental specialist do an analysis of the site and of the surrounding areas. We will not be impacted by any environmental constraints such as wetlands or riparian. There are some wetlands, but they are further than 150 feet away, and that would be an intermediate type of wetland, which would require only a 50-foot buffer. The site itself is surrounded by single-family homes to the west, single-family homes to the north, and then to the south, there are those 3 individual lots that are single-family lots that I believe one has been approved as a subdivision. This lot we are proposing to develop as a townhouse development with a single road feeding both sides of, or 2 groups of 4-unit and 7-unit buildings. The lot, each unit would have 1 car parked in the driveway and another car in its garage for a total of 22 off-street parking for the units, and we have an additional 11
parking spaces to the west or towards the end of the property for overflow parking and for visitors parking. We had received and reviewed the letters that were submitted to us from both the township engineer and the township planner. And I could quickly go through that in a response to the engineer's review letter.
Just to be clear for the record, Mr. Aller, the letters that we have and the most recent ones are from December of 2023. I just wanted to confirm that there were no other letters issued. We did not receive any.
That's all that I have too. I have our engineer's letter of December 8th, 2023, and the planner's letter dated December 6th, 2023.
Yeah, that's what I have. Thank you.
Mr. Plucker, did you have a planner that is now conflicted in that submission from 2023?
Yes, we did.
Why don't we speak to that?
Okay. Originally, the plan was submitted by Harbor Consultants.
Yes.
They were then appointed as the planner for this board. Therefore, my client was required to retain a conflict engineer, so he hired Mr. Deck's firm. As far as I'm aware, the board's current planner had no involvement with this application.
Okay, that's important.
And that we'd be fine with her sitting on this.
Right, but being that the planner that wrote this report is no longer here, and the planner was conflicted during your second submission, Scarlett Doyle is no longer employed by
Correct.
by Bridgewater Township. And our new planner, who was previously conflicted, or is conflicted from being hired by Bridgewater Township, have we had our new planner review this and update that letter?
So I'll jump in.
Yes.
I had no prior involvement with the application. This is
That's what I was going to ask you. I just want to clarify there's no
Th-
conflict.
These are important details.
Yes, so I had no even awareness that the project existed. It was our engineering side department that was handling this, which were usually pretty separate. So I had no even understanding until I saw the application here as a Bridgewater Township employee. As far as utilizing Scarlett's review memo,
So before we do that, just Mr. Plucker, you agree that there's no conflict and we can move forward?
We do agree.
as far as using Scarlett's review memo, I did review the plans, I did look them over, I did do a review report and concurred a lot with Scarlett's report without having to duplicate or redo the work. There's a few projects that are left over between the planning board and the zoning board where Scarlett had issued a review, or there was one or two hearings where there weren't significant revised plans where we just relied upon Scarlett's review rather than redoing the work. And
Right.
so that's why that we're relying on this review memo. If there are any revisions after tonight, then I'll prepare a supplemental review and still rely on some of her original comments. So her memo is now my memo. It's very similar to the Starbucks application where we utilized Scarlett's memo initially.
Right, but I just wanted to put this all out there because there's zero chance of us reaching a decision tonight for that reason alone.
And I really do appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I think it's an important issue, and I'm glad it was addressed by the board and the new planner.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
And it was acceptable to the applicant.
All right.
All right, thank you. Mr. Deck, you were about to, I believe, go through Mr. Burr's review letter?
That is correct. The letter dated December 8th, 2023. I'll go right to page 2 of the review letter, and we'll go through those items. I had responded in kind to that letter with point-by-point review following Mr. Burr's comments. So, and I believe every member of the board has this. I'll go through quickly. I think some of these things are pretty obvious. Number one, we did provide a detailed report, and that it
Interrupt, but I want to make sure I understood what you said. You responded to Mr. Burr's December 8th letter in writing?
yes,
The board does not have that.
I don't think I have that.
It was filed with the board, Mr. Aller and Mr. Chairman. It is,
that's our development.
And what's the date of that?
Mine's dated May 5th.
May 5th of
24.
It was in with the stormwater management feasibility report. I just found it.
They were filed at the same time, and there was a covering letter
Gotcha.
including those documents in addition to some others.
All right. Right before
Oh,
this.
I'm sorry. I got it. That's this one.
That is our,
It looks like this.
yeah,
It's a project description, Mr. Aller, with the document you were just referring to.
Should be another document.
It's also dated, bless you, it's also dated May 5th, but it says technical comments.
Cover letter to this, so I was really focused on your review, I guess, your outline. Okay, we have it. Thank you.
You do have the other.
Yes. Have call.
Okay, great. Okay, so item one, we are and did prepare that overview summary of the site. Two revised plans. We've added the engineers plus the architect's plans. They both show 22 units as was described earlier. The list of variances is listed in the additional correspondence that we were looking at just previously. And we do make a list of the variances, and I'll read those out quickly. The site is in a zone R10 zone. We're requiring.
You hold that microphone up a little closer, because now I'm having trouble hearing you down here.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. It's a use variance, one family allowed, multifamily proposed, density allowed with the 1.25 acres is 4.3 dwelling units per acre. We are proposing 22 dwelling units per acre. The FAR 0.47 as a 0.25 is allowed. Lot width, we have 150 feet required. We have 150 feet along the frontage of the property, and coverage allowed maximum is 35%, and we are proposing 58.2%. The a survey which was at first not provided and requested by the borough engineer and board engineer. We have provided that in our package, and that was done by Brzezinski Surveying LLC, dated 9/12/2023, and I believe everyone has that in their package. And what that shows is the existing condition of the site, shows the existing building at the site, and shows that it is predominantly wooded, except for around the existing single-family home there.
Just for clarity of the record, Ed, I believe it's a side-by-side duplex, if I'm not mistaken, just so
I think, yes,
we're
as a matter of
accurate.
fact, you're right, there's two doors, two front doors, so that would be a duplex type of a structure. That's correct. I briefly touched on the environmental constraints. There are none on the property, and we did have the environmentalist do an assessment, and that his report is also included in a package that you have in front of you. A tree count, as mentioned in the engineer's comments, has not been done. That would be something that would be provided at the time when we would be in front of the board for site plan approval. The site itself, and I think it's been mentioned a number of times, at least by our professionals, is that this site would be an excellent position for a transition area, and that would be something that the planner, which will be testifying after I do my testimony, would explain that reason. The existing easement, the roadway, we did receive permission from the property owner for the use of this roadway, and it should be noted that the roadway also services the other lots that front on the roadway itself. So without this access to Mount Pleasant Avenue, not only our lot, but the two other lots would be landlocked. There would be no other access. So this road is not only necessary for our site, but for the other two properties.
Are you saying that the other two properties are covered under this easement? And if that's true, why is it that you negotiated the easement for those other two homes?
It is my understanding that in addition to the applicant having an agreement with the owner of the garden apartments, the developer of the the approved subdivision, negotiated his own separate agreement, which also requires the building of a road behind the two or newer existing single-family homes to the south. It's my understanding that road and the additional few units that were approved construction has not commenced for that yet. But to answer your question, it's my understanding there is a separate agreement in connection with that subdivision approval.
The two agreements are separate.
Correct.
Thank you.
But ultimately accomplish the same goal, which is easement access and the perpetual maintenance of a private road.
But there's no dependency one on the other. They're independent.
There is not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Blocker, can you provide us with copies of the easements?
Mr. Attorney, we have an agreement right now. It's contractual. I don't believe there is anything recorded. I believe that if and when any approvals are granted, I believe something would have to be memorialized and filed with the Somerset County Clerk. I don't want to not disclose anything, but right now we have a private agreement with the adjoining property owner. So before I commit to providing the board with anything, and possibly we can generate a document that we could provide to the board confirming the easement, I would just err on the side of caution so we could discuss that issue with the adjoining property owner.
At a minimum, we should get at least a summary of what will be covered in that easement. In particular, long-term maintenance of the roadway, who's responsible, how you're going to collect it, who's doing plowing, who's replacing the road.
Yeah. I can answer that now, and if the board requires something in writing, I can certainly generate and/or obtain that. But it would basically be the owner of the road will continue to maintain the road, and that there would be some financial arrangement between my client or the ultimate owners of any units and the garden apartment owner, which I believe is a similar arrangement to what the approved subdivision has.
Single-family subdivision was 3 lots, right?
I believe it was 6. I believe there are 2 that are constructed on Mount Pleasant Avenue, and I believe that the entity that obtained that approval, they're kind of in limbo with building the road, which would be required to access the back lots with a cul-de-sac. So I don't know the status of that. I obviously don't represent the owner, but I know there are no construction activities taking place at this time.
They'll have a separate agreement from this property.
My understanding is that they have a separate agreement.
And then this property would be for sale property, is that right?
Yes, I believe they would be sold without committing my client to a form of ownership, but likely there would be some kind of association formed.
It would either be a condominium association, or if they're rental, your client's going to own the entire lot.
Correct, but I think my client is leaning towards the association and selling the units.
So then either the association or your client is going to make contributions to the landowner who owns the road.
That's correct.
Some agreed-upon contribution.
Correct.
And the road to which you referred under the other development that has stalled for some reason is not a road that you would have use of. Is that true?
That is correct.
Thank you.
And just for clarity's sake, since we are on the subject, it would, I believe we provided an exhibit to show the easement area in connection with our last filing, but it would basically be Mount Pleasant Avenue from Main Street to the northernmost property line along Mount Pleasant Avenue of our property, immediately before you enter into the garden apartment complex proper.
Okay, so maybe for the next meeting, if you could, you can have an exhibit that you can put up on a screen, and we can put those up. Right?
Oh, yeah, you can bring a computer, HDMI cable.
Yeah, it's goes a lot better when everyone, because we all have a screen, you can't see it, but we all have a screen in front of us, so we can see that.
And more importantly, members of the public, which there are numerous people watching from home, they can see it. They have a right to know as well.
Okay, thank you. We will put something together with a visual exhibit so everybody can observe it and understand exactly what the arrangement is in the area that it does cover. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Deck, you can continue.
Thank you. The number of parking stalls that we are proposing in total 55, as I had said, We have 2 per unit, 1 in driveway, 1 inside the garage, and then we have an additional 11 stalls for the overflow parking and visitor parking. We have not received any township fire official comments. We are not proposing any sidewalks within the proposed site, although that could be something perhaps that might be further looked into if we were to receive the bifurcated application approval tonight and then continue to the site plan approval. We did provide additional topography. There is one sheet that's just has the topography shown on it in the package, but we also have it shown on our concept plan. And as I mentioned, there is a percent slope of about 2 to 3% from the east to the west, or from the bottom of the site towards the top of the site, or from the front to the right. We had done a considerable analysis of the drainage and the storm sewer capabilities of the site and how that can be utilized and worked. We had done investigations into the soil types of the property itself, and also what the seasonal high groundwater is according to the soil information that's off the NJGO web. And the type of soil that that site is predominantly within is a soil type that has about a 6.5 foot average depth to the seasonal high groundwater.
That microphone is getting away from you again, and he had it kind of pointed at your mouth.
Okay.
I'm just trying to help.
No, it doesn't, all right, I didn't realize that. So we have about 6.5 feet between the existing grade and the depth of seasonal high groundwater, and the type of soil that is there has a rate of percolation or a rate of recharge of about 1 inch per hour. And that is significant because what the proposed improvement would be to have the roadway designed and constructed as a pervious type of pavement, which is something that meets NJDEP best management practices as far as addressing water quality and water recharge. So what that does is the water is able to permeate or go through the pavement and then into a substrata of stone, which would be constructed underneath the pavement, and then recharge into the soil. And the requirement is 1 inch per hour, and we're have about 1.1. So we're able to make that work, and that would be a much better way of designing the drainage than having some sort of large recharge type of system, which is now not as recommended as it was once in the past, but more of a better management practice type of approach to detention is now what the NJDP, and I'm sure all municipalities adopted that, or are also in favor of. So that would take care of the stormwater management facilities, and that would really, I think, in a real quick synopsis, address the township engineer's review letter. There is a letter from the planner, but I am not going to address that. I believe we have the planner here to discuss those issues. So I believe if there's any questions that the board may have at this point, I'd like to answer those.
There seems to be a number of stories for these townhouses. Is it 2.5 or 3.5?
It's 2, and the architect here, he could explain that, but we do meet the zone criteria. We do not exceed that. We are not looking for any variances for that.
Well, you're saying it's 2.5 stories.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Waga, our architect, is here tonight and will testify, and it's probably better if he addresses that issue, sir.
Okay.
You did mention the parking, and you said you had I think it was 11 overflow spaces.
That's correct.
And the formula that was used to calculate that, what was it, 58 maybe?
55?
How many?
55?
55 spaces. Does that allow for visitor parking, or is that taking into account how many cars the residents of a three-bedroom unit might have, and then having overflow parking to make up the minimum number of parking spaces that one might expect? And if I have visitors, where do they park?
Well,
As he will testify, I've just been informed by our architect, all units are 2 bedrooms. There are no 3-bedroom units.
There are no three-bedroom units? Okay.
That's correct.
Was that a change in the plan, or is that, because I thought they were built to be built as three-bedroom?
No, I don't believe any version of the plan that was on file with the board proposed 3 bedrooms.
Well, that's what it says on our splash page here that we're looking at, and you might see on that screen over there, that they were three-bedroom units.
I saw that too in one of the reports, not just whoever wrote that summary.
Yeah, I think part of the confusion is that when the original plan with the 14 units was filed, there were 3-bedroom units, but that is not the plan that is currently on file and what we're seeking approval for here as part of this hearing now.
But don't you have to provide 3-bedroom units for affordable housing?
We will address that with the architect and our planner, and I think it's been clear we're not coming to an end of this hearing this evening, and that is something we will look into.
Because, there's certain requirements for 2-bedrooms, 3-bedrooms.
I agree.
Mr. Plucker, you sat in the back of the room and you watched this board operate. Literally, we took 4.5 months down to the last shrubbery, down to the last piece of drainage. We brought in accident reports. We listened to planners. We listened to architects. We went back and forth on 4 revisions. And you sat there and you watched it. How can we possibly even move forward when we have so much confusion? We have a summary here from our township professional, from Nancy in our land use office, talking about 3-bedroom units, that we have an engineer that's telling us one thing, we have an architect that's telling us another. It's 9:30 at night. Listen, you can continue as long as you want till 10 o'clock. But I'm going to tell you right now, this board, speaking for myself, I'm confused. I don't know where you're at. We've got different planning reports. Frankly, we have conflicting language. I'm looking at 3-bedroom units, and you tell me, never mind, it's only 2-bedroom units. New Jersey has a state-mandated affordable housing component that you haven't addressed, but you will address. So what are you asking this board to do? What are you telling this board? I'm just confused. So where are we going to spend the last 30 minutes of this volunteer board's time?
And in all fairness, Mr. Chairman, when I saw the agenda, I was very confused as well.
Okay.
I previously represented that since, I believe, October or November, the plan that's been on file with this board is the current plan. It was
That agenda's been on our website since last Tuesday. I always make sure that the members of this public, of this township, always are aware that they're notified and they have full and clear notice well in advance of every meeting. So that's crap. That's been on our website for over a week, and you should have said something, because I came in tonight thinking that there was going to be 3 bedrooms, and you just said you reviewed it. So what is it? Is it 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms that you're going to apply for with this board?
Mr. Chairman, I saw the agenda. With all due respect, I did not look at the board's website, and I don't mean
We just joked about at the beginning of this hearing that silence is acceptance. So you didn't say anything. You had a week to make a change, and you didn't make the change. So now you're asking the board to miss their dinners and miss their Boy Scout meetings and Girl Scout meetings and to listen to a case that you could have corrected a week ago.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I hear you loud and clear. In light of your comments, in light of what I will concede there is confusion between the agenda and what we are here seeking, and there are some other issues brought up, I would respectfully suggest that we take a time out tonight. I will talk to my client, I will talk to my professionals, and we will clear this up so it is crystal clear for a continuation.
You sat there and you watched us operate. You watched this board go down to the meticulous level of a shrub, and you're asking for a bifurcated report. I think you're doing your client a disservice. But nonetheless, you can have the last 30 minutes of our time. You're more than welcome to it, and I'm more than happy to sit here and chair this meeting.
I think in light of the various comments, I think it would be appropriate to take a timeout, and we will come back and we will make clear for the board what we are seeking. We believe that it is already clear, and I don't know why there is confusion.
I just told you, it's been on our website. Our agenda's been available
With
since
all
last
due respect,
Tuesday.
Mr. Chairman, I did not look at the plans posted on the website.
Okay.
All right, with all due respect.
So we have, the next available spot for you is July 23rd. Before that would happen, we have CX Towers, which is also scheduled for that evening, a cell tower case. Mr. Sullivan could probably fill you in my opinions on cell towers. Sometimes they're not the quickest cases that I hear. But you're welcome to that, to be second up that evening. After that, it's into Labor Day. That would be the first meeting in September, which I have nothing on the schedule at that point.
Could we take 3 minutes, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely, take all the time you want.
Thank you very much. What do you think the probability of CX is on the 23rd? Okay. You may want to take the 23rd, July 23rd, because we have reason to believe that CX Towers is having trouble securing easements potentially. Okay, and July 23rd would be good for us.
Right, and I will make sure that Nancy follows up with them tomorrow and telegraphs that information to you. So if you want it, right now, September 10th is really the next available date, but if CX Towers has trouble securing their water tower easements, we won't have a case on July 23rd.
Okay, and we are available, so we will take the 23rd.
Why don't we take that?
Thank you.
And I'll have Nancy tomorrow get with CX, and that way we can get you back, and if CX doesn't come back, you can have the whole night.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Plunkett.
Can I ask a question, sir?
Please.
Let me just ask one question. I'm looking at the tax map. So are you saying that somebody will be traveling down Main Street, I guess, from like the stadium? They'll make a right on Mount Pleasant. They'll travel up Mount Pleasant past 37, 38, 39, and then they'll make a left down your proposed tree line verticular circulation. Is that what we're saying here? Is that correct? It's one lot. You have one lot that you're going to propose this on. That's correct. Okay. I just want to make sure. So then you're going to make a left, you're going to go up that road, and on the right and on the left, you're going to see houses, and then at the end, you're going to have that. Okay, that's fine. How wide is the road, this road?
24 feet.
24 feet. And I think you said you don't have firemen, so we don't know if a fire truck can go in and turn around and all. We haven't gotten that far. Okay, fine. Just making sure. I understand now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Okay, So we're going to carry this to July 23rd.
All right, so for members of the public, this application is being adjourned until July 23rd, 2024, 7 PM in this room. There'll be no further notices from the applicant.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And our next meeting, Jim, we have 2 residential cases, June 25th, 7 PM in this room. We'll see you then. If there's no other board business, a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Second. All right, Mr. Bongiorno, Mr. Wiley. Thank
Get
you.
home before, get home to dinner.
Got you a little early.
I can use it, that's too late.